بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, welcome to our next session of revision, going through the books that we have taken in level 1 of INKPOT syllabus. Those who are on the groups, you might have seen that today, Alhamdulillah, we announced level 2 and the syllabus and the books that we will take in level 2 bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. When will we start? On the post day says January. So it's just basically as soon as we finish the intro, the revision, we have the Majlis Sama' for the ijazat, and then we start straight after that, inshallah. We're currently in the book Al-Arba'un An-Nawawiyyah, the 40 Hadith of Imam An-Nawawi. We're going through the introduction at the moment that we did. The introduction is quite long and we're just summarizing. Now what's left is mainly the history and the books. I'm not going to go into the detail of every single book, that would take too long, and plus it's revision. I'm going to try to mention the minimum every single student of knowledge needs to know. So for example, I'm not going to mention, necessarily tell you every single condition of the Muwatta, Malik and Bukhari and so on, but you should at least know what is the methodology and the general, understanding of the book and where is it, what is this book. If someone says to you, this is in Muwatta Imam Malik, what does that mean? Okay, so we're on the 2nd century, if you remember. We finished with the 1st century of the Sahaba and Tabi'een. We're in the 2nd century of Islam, and this is where Imam Malik came, Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah came, and others. May Allah have mercy upon all of them. And the most famous of the hadith books was the one by Imam Malik, which is known as Al-Muwatta. Now Al-Muwatta is called Muwatta because it's easy and because it's agreed upon. These are the two meanings of Muwatta. So it's easy because the Khalifa asked Imam Malik to get a book that people can use as a reference point and as a as like a thing to go back to. So he made it, but he said, look, don't make it obligatory upon the people. So he made it easy. And secondly, it's agreed upon because he showed it to 70 different scholars of Medina and they all said it's good. Right? What is a Muwatta? A Muwatta is a book that has statements of the Prophet ﷺ and of Sahaba and Tabi'een. It has all three in there. It's like a mixture. You might have a bit more hadith, especially Malik's, but it has the others. So it's not specific to this one. And Imam Malik has a lot of balaghat as well, where he would say balaghan, it has reached me, and not necessarily mention the whole chain, but they have all been found outside in the main explanations by Ibn Abdul Barr. The main explanations of the Muwatta Imam Malik, there are two, both by Ibn Abdul Barr. Ibn Abdul Barr is known as the Hafiz of the West, Hafidhu al-Maghrib, whereas Khatib al-Baghdadi is known as Hafidhu al-Mashriq. And he passed away, both of them passed away in the year 463. And he's one of the main people in the Maliki madhab. He has two explanations of Muwatta Imam Malik. At-Tamheed, which is a more hadithi explanation, and Al-Istidhkar, which is a more fiqhi explanation. At-Tamheed and Al-Istidhkar. So that's what we mentioned regarding Muwatta Imam Malik. Then we have the two Musannafat. You can read the information here. And I know if I missed stuff out, you guys have your notes. You can go over that. But Musannaf is a book which has everything, hadith of the Prophet and Sahaba and Tabi'een. But the main thing is what are they known for? Focusing on the statements of the Sahaba and Tabi'een. Fatawa of the Sahaba and Tabi'een. Mawqufat and Maqtu'at. That's what they are known for. That's what they are known for. So this is the Musannafat, and they're massive encyclopedias. For example, Musannaf Abdul Razak has over 20,000 hadith. Yeah? And I believe Ibn Abi Shaybah is a lot bigger. I've not written the number here, but I believe it's about 30,000, maybe even 40,000 hadith. Can't remember the exact number. These are the main books in the 2nd century. The 3rd century is the golden era for hadith. This is where we have the 6 books of hadith. Right? In total, there's a terminology called Al-Kutub Al-Tis'ah, the 9 books of hadith. And some say As-Sitta, the 6, which is the first 6 out of the 9. So in total, what are they? Bukhari, Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan Abi Dawud, Sunan Tirmidhi, Sunan Nisa'i, Sunan Ibn Majah, Muslim Ahmad, Muwatta Imam Malik, and Sunan Ad-Darimi. These are known as the 9 main major foundational books of hadith in Islam. Right? We'll go through each one in chronological order. So we're going to go with Bukhari. Bukhari came first. Right? Imam Ahmad, he's a teacher of Bukhari. No, Ahmad came first. He wrote a book called Musnad. A Musnad is basically a book authored upon the names of the Sahaba. So for example, Abu Hurairah, all of his ahadith. Ibn Umar, all of his ahadith together. What topic? Different topics, but anything which he has narrated all in one place. So it's like a biography, but in terms of hadith. What have they narrated? Everything is narrated in one place. That's what Imam Ahmad did. And it's one of the biggest books of hadith, and it's got about 27,000 hadith in there. Then move on to Bukhari. Now, Sahih Bukhari is a nickname, which means authentic. Sahih means all the hadith in the authentic. There's a full name, Al-Jami' Al-Musnad Al-Sahih Al-Mukhtasar min Umuri Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa sunanihi wa ayyamih. If you don't fully, we'll quickly go through it. Al-Jami' means comprehensive. It's got a number of topics, not just Aqidah or Fiqh. A lot of topics, 8 topics, which I've written for you here. Musnad, this doesn't mean Musnad. The Musnad Imam Ahmad is Musnad in terms of the name of a book has been authored in the name of Sahaba. But Musnad in terms of hadith is a hadith which has a whole sanad, a full, complete chain of narration, going back to the Prophet ﷺ. Mukhtasar, summarize. They say Imam Bukhari memorized over 600,000 hadith. So this is, about 8,000 hadith. But 8,000 hadith, so it's not going to be that many. Min umuri Rasulullah ﷺ, from the affairs of the Prophet ﷺ, like what he used to do. Wa sunanihi, and the sunnah actions that he would do. Wa ayyamihi, and his days and how he spent them. That's the whole name, but most people know it as a nickname, Sahih al-Bukhari. And that will suffice, inshallah. But a student knowledge should try to memorize the actual name. Al-Jami' Al-Musnad Sahih Al-Mukhtasar min Umuri Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa sunanihi wa ayyamih. Why did Imam Bukhari write it? One general reason, which is weaker hadith being spread. There's 2 other more specific reasons. One, that he saw a dream that he was with the Prophet ﷺ and he was fighting off flies, right? He was swatting flies away from the Prophet ﷺ, and they interpreted this dream to mean that he was defending the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And the other was when he was with his teachers, Haqib Rahuya, who said, it would be great if you guys had a hadith that has authentic, a book that had only authentic hadith. And he said, this caused me to do it. So these are the 3 reasons which I've written for you over here as well. Now, there's a lot that we can say about Imam Bukhari, right? One thing Bukhari is known for is fiqh in his chapter headings, i.e. his chapter headings are very precise, and if you want to know the fiqhi opinions of Imam Bukhari, the chapter heading gives you that. But Shaykh Al-Hashimi, Abdul Wakil Abdul Haq, the father, he's got 2-volume book just explaining the chapter headings of Bukhari, not even the hadith. Imam Bukhari is known to be very, very precise in his chapter headings. And what's the main explanation of Sahih Bukhari? Everyone should know this. Fath al-Bari by Ibn Rajab. Correct? لا. Fath al-Bari by Ibn Hajar. Ibn Rajab has a Fath al-Bari as well. He started to explain Sahih Bukhari, but he died before he could complete it. Rahimahullah, he reached, subhanAllah, Kitab al-Janaiz, the Janazah. So he only did basically the beginning and Kitab al-Salah. But Ibn Hajar came later and he did a full explanation, and he took the same name, Fath al-Bari. The ulama do say that if Allah allowed Ibn Rajab to live and complete it, it would be better than Ibn Hajar's, but ala kulli hal, the main one that we have is Fath al-Bari bi Sharh Sahih al-Bukhari by Ibn Rajab, by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, and it's the one here which is highlighted. We have Sahih Muslim. Again, Sahih Muslim has a proper name as well. Al-Musnad al-Sahih Al-Mukhtasar min al-Sunan bin-Naql al-Adl an Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The words are the same, but a few extra ones. Naql means transmitting, narrated, and Adl means trustworthy. It's all been narrated by trustworthy narrators. Why did he write the book? Again, generally because there was weaker hadith, but he mentioned in his introduction that one of his students asked him. So he did so. And Imam Muslim was from the first muhaddithun, and very few who actually wrote an introduction. Many muhaddithun would just start and say the first chapter and narrate hadith. Imam Muslim wrote a nice introduction, a very powerful introduction. We should read it one day. Maybe we can do a dawra on it, going through the importance of narrating hadith and making sure it's authentic and so on. Okay? And he didn't write any chapter headings physically, but he did order them in order. So you could say there were chapter headings, but not physically. So in terms of meaning they were. And now if you open Sahih Muslim, if you to buy it, you'll find chapter headings in there. Where did the ulama take it from? Imam An-Nawawi rahimahullah. Imam An-Nawawi has a main explanation called Al-Minhaj fi Sharh Sahih Muslim Ibn al-Hajjaj. And in there he added chapter headings himself. And the ulama really like those chapter headings, so they've taken it, and when they print the book, they put it there. Normally in Arabic, they put it in square brackets to show that it's not from Imam Muslim, but it was taken from Imam An-Nawawi. But in English, I don't know if they do that. Now, what are some of the differences between Bukhari and Muslim? Bukhari, even though it's more authentic than Muslim, it's considered, the Muslim is considered better for a muhaddith. Why? Because Bukhari would only mention the part of the hadith which is needed, he wouldn't mention the whole hadith. So the person said 10 different things, about 10 different topics. Whichever chapter it comes under, he'd put that one sentence. But Imam Muslim will put the whole narration. And Imam Bukhari would only mention one chain of narration and move on. But Imam Muslim would mention a few, with 3, 4. Okay? These are the main differences between Bukhari and Muslim. There's others as well. The shortest chain in Bukhari is 3, the shortest chain in Muslim is 4. And there's others, but we'll suffice with that. Bismillah ta'ala. The main explanation of Sahih Muslim, Al-Minhaj, Sharh Sahih Muslim al-Hajjaj by Imam An-Nawawi. What's the meaning of Muttafaqun alayh? Muttafaqun alayh means agreed upon, i.e., if a hadith is narrated both in Bukhari and Muslim, it's called Muttafaqun alayh, but there's a condition, which is that it has to be the same Sahabi, the same companion. If the wording is the same, but it's 2 different companions who have narrated it, then we'd say these are 2 different hadiths. We would say this is narrated by Bukhari on the authority of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh, and this has been narrated by Muslim on the authority of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, for example. And all the ulama agree that everything which is in Bukhari or Muslim is fully authentic, and I mentioned some statements over here for you. Now we come to the Sunan. What is a Sunan in terms of a book? A Sunan is a book which is ordered upon the chapters of fiqh only. So you'll start with Tahara, Wudu and all of those issues, then Salah, then Zakah, and then fasting, and then Hajj and transactions. They might differ in exact order, but roundabout as that. And there are 4 main ones: Sunan Abi Dawud, Sunan Al-Tirmidhi, Sunan Al-Nasa'i, and Sunan Ibn Majah. We're going to talk about Sunan Al-Tirmidhi because what's better is not to call it Sunan Al-Tirmidhi, but something else. We're going to get to it. But the main one, these 4. Okay, so we start with Sunan Abi Dawud. It's really, really good. And he mentions himself that he doesn't mention in a chapter except the most authentic which has been narrated. Not necessarily every hadith is authentic, but if they're not, he says, look, there's no other hadith stronger than that. So let's say it's Hasan, that means that topic there's no Sahih hadith. That was his intention. And there's a lot we can say about his methodology, but Imam Abu Dawud actually explained it himself. He wrote a letter to the people of Makkah, and it's actually titled Risalatu Abi Dawud ila Ahli Makkah. The letter of Abu Dawud to the people of Makkah. He explained methodology in that. We can go through that at a different time. The main explanation is Aun al-Ma'bud. Then Tirmidhi. Now, when it comes to Tirmidhi, it's better to call it Jami' al-Tirmidhi. It's better to call it Jami' al-Tirmidhi and Sunan. Why? Because Sunan, we said, is specific to chapters of fiqh. But Jami' has more topics. So he actually has more topics in there. But because it's in that, it's like grouped together, Sunan Abi Dawud, Tirmidhi, Sahih Ibn Majah, the word Sunan is used a lot. The main explanation of Jami' al-Tirmidhi is Tuhfatul Ahwazi by Al-Mubarakfuri. Then we come An-Nasa'i after that. And the main explanation of An-Nasa'i, probably Hashiyat al-Sindi. But if you want a real detailed one, is by Sheikh Muhammad Ali ibn Atam al-Ethiopi. He's got in depth, I don't know, probably about 50 volumes. He's got one or 30 volumes, I can't remember the exact number. He's got one on Sahih Muslim as well. The Sheikh passed away just very recently. He's a Sheikh of many of the Mashaykh, even Sheikh Maliki. Sheikh Maliki studied with him for a good couple of decades, I believe. And Sunan Ibn Majah. Now Sunan Ibn Majah, out of all of the books of 6 books of hadith, it just has the most amount of weaker hadith, but it's still a lot of authentic and powerful hadith in there. However, a lot of the other hadith do overlap in companion with other books as well. The main explanation I'll probably just say is Hashiyatu Asyuti or Hashiyatu Sindi. Now, after that, this is the 3rd century. We move on now to the 4th century. In terms of authentic books, there are 3 main authentic books outside Bukhari and Muslim. The first is Sahih ibn Khuzaymah, the second is Sahih ibn Hibban, and the third is Mustadrak al-Hakim. The most authentic out of all of these are Sahih ibn Khuzaymah, very, very strong. It might have a few weaker hadith, but it's overall very, very good. Then you have Sahih ibn Hibban, which has a bit more weakness. And then you have Mustadrak al-Hakim, which has quite a few weak hadith. The Sahih ibn Hibban, he ordered it in a very weird way. As you can see, he puts all the commandments first, then prohibitions, then things a person needs to know, then things which are permissible, then actions of the Prophet ﷺ. It's a very different way of writing hadith, or writing a book. It's not simple as wudu, tahara, salah, zakah, and so on. We come to Mustadrak al-Hakim, and as I mentioned, Mustadrak al-Hakim. Firstly, what is a Mustadrak? It has Sahih hadith, yes, but what does Mustadrak actually mean? Mustadrak means is that you look at another book, and you see, okay, the author used these conditions and this was his methodology in that book. Therefore, I'm going to use that same methodology, and any hadith he didn't put in his book but fits that criteria, I'll put it in my book. So Mustadrak al-Hakim, what he did is that he looked at Bukhari and Muslim. He looked at all the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim, and he said, right, there's a lot of hadith that fulfill the conditions of Bukhari and Muslim but are not in Bukhari and Muslim. because it was summarized book. So there's so many other hadith that are authentic as well. I'll put them here. So technically it should be a very, very authentic book. However, there are many weak hadith in there, and the ulama mentioned mainly two reasons for that. They say firstly, he wrote it when he was very, very old in age, so after his prime, and then you start to, your memory starts to deteriorate slightly. And secondly, they say that he didn't revise, he just wrote it and went. And how many times do you write a text message and you make typos? So, me, I type even like a book or something and I go back and there's so many mistakes. So, this is Mustarak al-Hakim, but nonetheless he was a great Imam and he has many other books. He has Ma'rifatu Ulum al-Hadith or Anwa al-Hadith. He has a very powerful book in Musalla al-Hadith, and he's a very, very great Imam. Then now I'm going to mention some other books. There's two books here, Sharh Mushkil al-Athar and Sharh Ma'ani al-Athar, both by Imam al-Tahawi. Sharh Mushkil al-Athar, what he does, he takes all the ahadith which seemingly contradict one another and he tries to explain them. And Sharh Ma'ani al-Athar, he gathers those ahadith which aid the Hanafi madhab more. You have Mu'jam al-Tabarani, which is three ma'ajim, the big one, small one, and middle one. So as-Saghir is small, Awsat is middle, Kabir is the big one. And these are massive, books of hadith. Mu'jam al-Kabir, he mentions 25,000 hadith, and he authors it like a Musnad basically. But Mu'jam al-Awsat, he narrates hadith from 2,000 teachers that he studied from. And then Mu'jam al-Saghir, the small one, is similar to Mu'jam al-Awsat, but just mentions one hadith from each teacher. Kitab al-Sunan by Daraqutni is also a book of Sunan. Sunan al-Kubra Bayhaqi is also a Sunan. Now there were books known as Mustakhrajat. Mustakhrajat is what you do. It's different to Mustadrak. Mustakhrajat, you go to another book, but now you study that book. You look at each hadith, and you're like, okay, this is the first hadith. For example, Bukhari, Innama al-a'malu bin-niyat. Let me see how many other chains of narration I can find for this hadith. So Mustakhrajat is where you go out and you find multiple chains of narration for one book. Then in the 5th and 6th century, there's other books. You have books on Kutub al-Sittah, where they get all the 6 books of hadith and put all the hadith together. Kutub al-Atraf is where you write the beginning of the hadith and then ... So the Prophet said, Innama al-a'malu bin-niyat ... That's it. It's like you could say like a contents page kind of. But the point of that is not the hadith, it's a chain of narration. They focus a lot on the chain of narration and they study the chain of narration. As-Zawaid are books where you compare more than one book together and you say these are hadith and the extra hadith which are not in the original book. So you have Zawaid of Muslim over Bukhari, i.e. those are hadith which are only in Muslim and they're not in Bukhari. Mawdu'at in hadith means fabricated, as we explained last lesson. So some scholars got together and gathered all the fabricated hadith. Not actually hadith, but they gather this so people know that these are fabricated and made up. You have Kutub Tarajum al-Ruwah, which are books that of the narrators. Okay, the main one that you want to know is Mizan al-I'tidal by Imam al-Dhahabi. This was my bad. Is Al-Kamal by Al-Maqdisi. Al-Kamal by Al-Maqdisi was a very big and massive extensive work going through the narrators, but then it became very famous by Imam al-Mizzi. This is why I've highlighted this. He summarized it, Tahdhib al-Kamal by al-Mizzi. So this is the main one that people use. But then if you want to have something a bit easier in 4 volumes, Imam Ibn Hajar summarized Tahdhib al-Kamal into 4 volumes, into Tahdhib al-Tahdhib, and to make it even easier, he summarized it all into 1 volume, just name trustworthy, name weak, that's it, in Taqrib al-Tahdhib. Then there are books regarding just the Sahaba and their lives and so on. You have 3 books, Al-Isti'ab by Ibn Adbar, Usul al-Ghabah by Ibn al-Athir, and Al-Isaba by Ibn Hajar. Kutub al-Takhrij go to the study of different ahadith. Kutub al-Gharib, Gharib here means difficult words, like it's like a dictionary for hadith. The most famous one is Al-Nihaya fi Gharib al-Hadith by Ibn al-Athir. So if you come across a hadith and you don't know what it means, you have 2 options. Either go to the explanation of the hadith, so in Bukhari you go to Fath al-Bari, or you go to this book, and this is like a dictionary for hadith. Now we can go through books of ahkam. Books of ahkam are books of kutub al-ahkam, hadith al-ahkam. Those hadith books which focus just on fiqh rulings. So the first one that will come to your mind is Sunan Abi Dawud, the Sunan Adha, but they're quite big. So the ulama have written more books of ahkam later, which are smaller. The first one that we should study, so after 40 hadith on Nawawi, you study Umdat al-Ahkam, which is known as Umdat al-Sughra, where it's about 450 hadith. Every hadith in there is either Bukhari or Muslim or both. Then you can study Bulugh al-Maram by Ibn Hajar. It has about 1300, 1400 hadith. Then there's a book Al-Muntaqa by Abu al-Barakat ibn Taymiyyah, who's a grandfather of Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah. He's got a book that's about, I think, 30,000 hadith or more than 30,000 hadith of ahkam. Now, they're the main ones. Yeah, I've talked a bit about Amdu Ahkam, Bulugh al-Maram here. You can read that in your own time. Al-Muharrar is similar to Bulugh al-Maram. Just a bit more, maybe like 1,500 hadith or maybe a bit more than that. And the difference between this and Bulugh al-Maram is Al-Muharrar focuses more on two differences. Firstly, he's Hanbali, so he has a few separate hadith, whereas Ibn Hajar is Shafi'i, but there's not a massive difference because hadith is hadith. But the main difference is that Al-Muharrar focuses more on the hadith aspect. Ibn Hajar is focusing on the fiqh, the meaning and so on. So he just says the hadith and who narrated it and the ruling on the hadith and move on. Ibn Abdul Hadi, he goes into the details of the ilal, the hidden defects and all of that. Al-Muntaqa, this is by the grandfather of Shaykh al-Islam that I talked to you about. We come to Mustalah Hadith. Now, this is a summary of Mustalah Hadith. Mustalah Hadith is the science which gives you principles to work out, is the hadith accepted or rejected. So we took a bit of it, like Sahih Hadith, what makes a Sahih Hadith. That is basically Mustalah Hadith. The first person to write a book of Mustalah Hadith is Ar-Rama Hurmuzi. Ar-Rama Hurmuzi. He's got a book called Al-Muhaddith Al-Fasil Bain Al-Wa'i Bain Al-Rawi Wal-Wa'i. Al-Muhaddith Al-Fasil Bain Al-Rawi Wal-Wa'i. And then there's many other, books of Mustalah Hadith. Ma'rifatu Anwa' Hadith by Al-Hakim. But then there's three main stages in Mustalah. The first is Khatib Al-Baghdadi. He came, there's not science of Hadith except that he wrote a book on it. And he has his main book, I believe, Al-Kifayah, when it comes to Mustalah Hadith. Then after him came Ibn al-Salah. He wrote a famous book known as Muqaddimah Ibn al-Salah, but the actual name is Ma'rifatu Anwa' al-Hadith, but it's famously known as Muqaddimah Ibn al-Salah. That's it. He's like the main guy now. Nobody came after him except that they worked on this book. Right? So even other books like the 1,009 Poetry, Al-Fiyat al-Iraqi by Imam al-Iraqi, or Al-Fiyat al-Suyuti, 1,009 Poetry by Al-Suyuti, or Ikhtisar al-Ulum al-Hadith, a summary of Ulum al-Hadith, Ibn Kathir. All of these are works on this book. It's a summary of the book, or it's a poem of the book, and so on. Okay? And then the third stage is Ibn Hajar. Okay? He's got a lot of books in Hadith. Maybe the most simple one that you know of is Nukhbat al-Fikr. Now, in terms of what should we study when it comes to Mustalah Hadith, we start with either Bayquniyya or Nukhbat al-Fikr. Bayquniyya is 34 lines, mention 34 types of Hadith. Nukhbat al-Fikr is a bit higher than that. Then you can move on to books like Ikhtisar Ulum al-Hadith by Ibn Kathir, with its explanation. Al-Ba'ith al-Hadith by Ahmad Shakir. Or you can move on to the 1,009 Poetries, Muqidha by Imam al-Zahabi, and there's many other books. Okay. Yeah, I've got a lot of these books here I've highlighted for you. And alhamdulillah, with that we finished the introduction to Hadith. Now we're going to talk about Imam An-Nawawi rahimahullah. Now Imam An-Nawawi rahimahullah, he passed away in the year 676, I believe. Okay. No, 676. Now he was from the greatest ulama of Al-Islam. He wrote many books. The most famous of his books, you could say, explanation of Sahih Muslim, the 40 Hadith of Nawawi, the book Riyadh al-Salihin. Yeah, Riyadh al-Salihin. He's got a book Al-Adhkar. He's got a book Al-Tibyan fi Adami Hamlat al-Quran, the etiquettes of the person of the Quran. He's got many books, rahimahullah. There's this nice story here where there's an old man who was a sheikh. He saw Imam An-Nawawi rahimahullah when he was a young boy. The kids are playing, he was studying. So he went to the father and said, look, this kid's got a lot of potential. The father said no, he needs to work for the family business. Eventually gave in, and then Imam An-Nawawi became Imam An-Nawawi. So imagine the reward that this old sheikh would be getting. Okay. He had a very severe craving, desire for learning. They say that he attended 12 lessons a day and revised 12 lessons a day. SubhanAllah, what time's left? Allah barakah in his time, subhanAllah. And it might not necessarily mean that 12 lessons is an hour each. It doesn't necessarily mean that. But it just shows that his whole day was filled with that. They say even when he would be sat with guests, he'll be sharpening his pencil whilst penances by talking to them. That way he's not wasting time, but then he's also giving them their rights. Okay, here's the aqidah. Many people have claimed that he's Ash'ari, but is that true or not? We say no, Wallahu alam, because yes, he has a few mistakes in Asma wa Sifat, but number one, he retracted. There's a small book that he wrote before he passed away called Juz fil I'tiqad, fi I'tiqad al-Salaf, and he's mentioned that he retracted. Number two, his main methodology is not the methodology of the Ash'ari. He doesn't say there's only 7 sifat, and doesn't say you have to give taqdeem, presence to the aql over the naql. So yes, he might have agreed with them in certain outcomes, but he didn't do it for the same reason, showing that his methodology is different. And therefore, what we say is that he made mistakes in certain chapters, but he's from Ahl Sunnah. Okay, now let's talk about the book itself. Now, the many ulama of the Salaf wrote books of 40 hadith, right? Like Abdullah al-Barak, al-Ajurri, and many of the Salaf. But the most famous one is the 40 hadith, Imam An-Nawawi rahimahullah. The history of this book is that before Ibn al-Salah, remember Ibn al-Salah has said he was the second stage in Mustalah hadith. He had a gathering. He said, look, I've gathered 26 hadith which encompass the whole religion. He titled it Al-Hadith al-Kulliyah, and then he narrated these 26 hadith to the students. Imam An-Nawawi rahimahullah came, took these 26 and added 16 to make it 42. Technically he plagiarized, however we don't call it that because he mentioned it. One of his books he mentioned it, and he said, look, I took this from Ibn al-Salah, so he attributed it to the person, and that's how you get barakah in your knowledge and in your works. Look, nobody accuses Imam An-Nawawi rahimahullah of this, and it's the first book that every student of hadith studies. So look at the barakah that there is in there, because he wanted to benefit the ummah and not call to himself. So now we have 42 hadith. Ibn Rajab came along, added 8 more. He said, oh, there's 8 more that I could add. Then he explained all 8. So now it's 50. He explained all 50. This is considered the main explanation of 40 hadith of Nawawi. It's called Jami' al-Ulum wal-Hikam. Jami' al-Ulum wal-Hikam. In English, it should translate to the comprehensive or the compendium of knowledges and sciences and wisdoms or something like that. Inshallah ta'ala. There's actually 42 hadith, but the Arabs like to round up, so they call it 40. There's many explanations. Right now, all you need to focus on is my explanation. If you want to add any more explanations, then you can go to Ibn Uthaymeen, and then Ibn Rajab's, and then many of the other explanations. Now, how did Imam An-Nawawi rahimahullah write this book? Some of the conditions that he mentioned is that he said it's going to be 40 hadith. Each hadith is 42, so that's fine. Each hadith is a foundation hadith in that chapter. If you want to talk about intentions, what's the main hadith? The first hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. If you want to talk about pillars of Islam, hadith number 3, Buni Islam ala khams. If you want to talk about bid'ah, hadith number 5, and so on. And he said, according to him, all are authentic. There are a couple which aren't. However, that's according to him, right? But majority of them are approximately 30 are from Bukhari and Muslim. Okay, so these are the main things. Then he wrote an introduction, which you can find. He wrote an introduction himself, which you can find in some manuscripts. The summary of the introduction is that he mentions why he wrote this book of 40, comprising of 40 hadith. There are 3 main reasons. The main reason is so that he can come under and gain all those virtues regarding spreading hadith. But then also number 2, following the Salaf. Many of the Salaf wrote books gathering 40 hadith. And then the third reason, which is the weakest one, he does mention it first, but it's not the main one, is that there is a weak hadith that mentions that whoever preserves for my nation 40 hadith regarding the religion, Allah will resurrect him on Yawm al-Qiyamah with the ulama and the fuqaha. And there's different wordings of this hadith, but the hadith is weak. But he's not doing it mainly focused on this hadith. It's called the actions of Salaf and the virtues of spreading hadith. Then he mentioned some of the Salaf who did so, and he mentions the rest of the conditions like I mentioned. There's this issue here. He says, even though he mentions himself the hadith is weak, he says scholars have agreed regarding the permissibility of acting upon weak hadith. This is incorrect, and I'll come back to this in a second, inshallah. But yeah, I think with that, I've written that out for you. Right, this is how we're going to explain it. Normally I go like this. During the revision I might not do the exact same thing, but normally we read the hadith, and then I mentioned the takhrij, where this hadith narrated. Okay, same Bukhari, Muslim, where? Any other hadith benefits that we can mention? The station of this hadith, have any ulama praised this hadith? Who's the narrator? Why is this hadith narrated? Why did the Prophet say it? Are there any difficult words in the hadith? The general summary of the hadith. Then number 10 is the main explanation of the hadith. And then number 11 is any extra benefits that can be found. So alhamdulillah, we'll suffice with that today. We've finished the introduction. Next lesson we can continue with the hadith number 1 with the intentions. Just the last part we have to come back to, which is can I act 1 week a hadith? If you want to read it, Imam An-Nawawi rahimahullah was actually incorrect. They made a mistake. May Allah have mercy on him. He said that the ulama agree that you can act upon weak hadith, and that is not the case. Many of the muhaddithun are very strict and say you can't act upon it at all. And I've written extensively on this, 3 pages. If you go to page 36 from the notes, right, then in here you can just read it all, inshallah. And I talked about the different opinions on whether it's permissible or not, or who says what regarding acting upon weak hadith. So for any more information, you can read all of that bi'iznillahi ta'ala. So with that, this is the revision for Thursday. Inshallah, we'll have a lesson on Tuesday. I will keep you guys updated. I'm landing back on Tuesday. And I'll try my best to come back in and we can do so bi'iznillahi ta'ala. But if not, I'll keep you guys updated, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless all of you and grant us all beneficial knowledge. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.